All right.
And welcome to everyone as you're zooming in from around the world. It's a delight to have you here. I'm Janet Harvey, and I'm joined with my colleague here, Lori Johnson. Uh, Lori is our coaching education manager here at inviteCHANGE, and most of you probably know me from having been around the block a few years. I just came back from a Chief Learning Officer organization event, and one of the gentlemen said to me, "You've really been doing this since 1996?" I said, "Yeah, really." And I'm still totally excited and love every second that we get to do this work. So, welcome to all of you. As people are coming in, you know how this works. It takes a little while to get everybody through the portal. Why don't you take a moment and chat and share with us what's the thing you're most wanting out of today's session? It could be as simple as, I just want to hang out with my peeps for a little while, or there might be something more substantive that you're looking for today. So let's go ahead and see what's in the room. What are you arriving wanting from today? And I continue to let people in the room. I didn't think that was a tough question. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Jeff.
You got some. Yeah.
Inspiration in what form? Like, are you getting inspired about leading a team, coaching a team, engaging in a team, making your team you're on a little better? What's the facet of working one to many that you're most intrigued to explore today?
That's a great question.
At least one new insight. I think I can do that for you, Catherine. There is a day, not a day that goes by that I don't learn something more. I think it's one of my greatest joys about the profession of coaching is that because the world is always changing and we are always changing and the circumstances and context are always changing. Anybody who thinks they're ever at a destination in our learning about working in a collective way, I think they're kidding themselves. There is so much for us to become more alert about, and we'll talk some more about that today for sure. Yes, how to foster the coaching mindset in a multicultural workplace. Hideo, as a matter of fact, I was telling a little of your story without identifying you, but a little bit of the story of the cross-cultural challenge. That isn't just language, folks. It's also the traditions that are resident in different locations when a company is in more than one place. And how do we handle that complexity and bring unity to shared purpose? So we can talk some more about that today for sure. And that is somebody, Candida. Excited to talk about team coaching and working in systems. That's terrific. And Steve, focus on your coaching chops. Love that. And what's going on around the US. Great. We will have an opportunity, of course, for you to do a little breakout. What would a Zoom room be without that? We also have a couple of polls. I've got some skills and some takeaways that I have for you today. And I want you to recognize that we can look at this subject. When Hamad and I were first working on this, we had it as me plus you equals we. But the more we talked about it and realized that so much of work today is happening more collectively rather than individually, it's actually more we's making us, just to keep it in really simple pronoun language. What is the influence on us when we're asked to work on multiple teams throughout the day? More work gets done by teams than by individuals in business. That's probably been true for 20 years. But I don't think we give it as much attention as we might in terms of what it means to a team leader, what it means to team members who are in multiple teams that likely have matrix affiliations and relevance and cross interdependence, as well as starting to recognize that we cannot any longer profess to be subject matter experts. It's just not possible. Um, the advent of technology in all its forms, not just generative AI, has led to new knowledge every 13 hours. That's the latest number that came out of LinkedIn and Microsoft. So I share that piece of data to say our work is about learning to stay in consistent curiosity. Check and notice our moments of assumption where we think we know the right answer, or we think we know what will influence this decision-making process this team might be in, but we'll be wrong some large percentage of the time. More importantly, we'll have missed the opportunity to elicit and to cultivate the most current perspective, which is from the people who are really doing the work. It's a very different stance for a team leader who's used to trying to create some consistency and stability, super important today in business. But at the same time, we miss the opportunity of somebody who has an out of the box idea. I'm just giving you some examples of where we might kind of push up against the edges of what we've traditionally thought of as what it means to work one to many. And I think that there's also, Jen, I'm looking at your comment here. I do some work with families and often talk about a team approach. One of my very favorite graduates of our generative team coaching program, actually, she and her four sisters had joint executor privileges to when their last parent died. So when she was going through live simulation and then her actual application in practice, she used the family meetings to navigate the completion of the executor function. It was one of the most profound final papers I've ever read. And, for those of you that have been trained as a coach, the commentary that we ask you not to coach with a family member because we have too much investment in who they are and what happens in their lives. Boy, talk about somebody trying to learn one-to-many coaching, working with something where there was a huge investment in everybody's outcomes on the other side. So I'll bring some more of that forward as we go through this subject. Let me just see if there's anything else that you're wanting that you want to say out loud on chat. What would you like to have out of today's session? I'll just give you another second or two here.
I like what Kimball mentioned, multi-generational teams, which, I mean, it reflects back to what you were just talking about, but also there's so much just, there's so many different people on teams now, and they come from so many different backgrounds, but where we came from, where we were born is very different, and our experiences are very different. And that's very important to think about.
And I think there's another piece to what Kimball is raising. And boy, was this in the room down in San Diego this last 2 days, that I think we hold the idea of difference as needing some kind of specialization.
Yeah.
We need to do it for this group this way, and this group this way, and this group this way. And I'd ask you to just sit with the idea that maybe there's something in our common humanity that transcends. We would say here at Invite Change that idea is wholeness. So just take a moment. What does that word mean to you? When you hear wholeness in the context of leadership or organizational systems or working one-on-one as a coach or working one-to-many for those of you that might be, how does the word wholeness show up in your work right now? I'm going to come back to it quite a bit. And um, some of you might be Gallup followers. There was a piece of research that came out in the last month on what followers want from leaders. If you haven't picked it up, throw that into your browser and have a look-see, because the number one need isn't trust anymore. Trust was the number for only 33%. 57% of respondents want the attributes of hope, which has two elements to it. The first is to have a positive feeling about the future. And the second is to be working with a leader who can share a clear direction for the future.
Mm.
And I think this is such important data for us to pay attention to. This particular study was looking at personal and professional context both. When they took out the data on the personal attributes and just looked organizationally, that number goes up to 64% of respondents want hope. It has been part of their studies, but this was a profound increase. Now, I'm sure all of you are sensitive enough to be here in this session that you're already seeing this in your organizations or with your customers and clients because of the situation of the world. And yet, I think there's something very fundamental underneath this idea of hope, which is how do we restore humanity when we're in the throes of complexity and uncertainty that is um, absolutely activating our reticular activating system to try to protect ourselves, right? Um, to some greater or lesser degree, all of you have gotten involved in some way with meditation and mindfulness practices and activities to help people come back home to ground and to center. These are all reacting to an environment that's out of control. And yet, if we really thought about wholeness, we might realize that the answer to what's in our control is inside of each person. And we won't see it outside of ourselves until we see it inside of ourselves. So another piece to just tease you with a little bit before we launch into our full agenda here. So let's see what else we've got, Kimball. Present and listening. Curious versus judgment. And give direction with a why. And Rajal, wholeness to me is the integration of all my aspects. And how do you become aware of all of your aspects? And how do you begin to trust that somehow, somewhere inside of the organizational context, the answer resides? Might not be obvious to us in the moment, but this is the great gift of coaching, is that it elicits, it asks, it curates, it invites, it welcomes the open question that says, you may think you do not know, but I believe that somewhere inside of you, you have the resourceful, capable, creative aspects of the self that will create something to be known. It's always been true. We forget because we define knowing in such a narrow way. So when we think about how do I move from one-on-one work to one-to-many work, which I much prefer than getting into a debate about team and group. So for those of you that might be disappointed by that, the distinction between team and group is at that level of specialization, when in fact, as practitioners, whether we're talking leader or coach, doesn't matter. How am I perceiving what is moving through this group of people that is in the direction of what is expected in terms of results and outcomes or experience, because sometimes we're working more at that level of restoring a sense of vitality in a team. It's less about their outcomes and more about how they're being together. And ultimately, what is different when I'm working collectively rather than individually? Most of us would say that we are operating, let's see, we're operating on the foundation of one-on-one to begin to work in one-to-many. Now, that sounds a little jargony, so I'll tell you how I talk about this with customers when they want to bring us in to do work with teams. I ask them to think about what they've been observing. What are the behaviors you recognize? When you take the temperature on the energy in the room, what are you accounting for? What are the ways in which you are interpreting what you're observing and the energy you're accounting for and reaching a conclusion? How often do you let that conclusion that you're drawing influence the choices you make for how you're engaging with them? What did I just do? That was a whole series of open-ended questions, inviting that leader to pull back a little bit from the conclusion they've drawn and to recognize the series of inferences and assumptions that they have made about what this collective of people is motivated by right now. And you all know most of the time we're going to be wrong. If for no other reason than my life experience is influencing how I make meaning out of what I am observing. And it will not be the same as how the people in that collective are making meaning. So, our shorthand is we talk about we're creating awareness. Of course, we're creating awareness. For what purpose? To see what's actually occurring. This is another way of thinking about wholeness. There's the wholeness of the self. There's the wholeness of the system. There's the wholeness of the collective that's come together, right? This room right here, all of you gathering here on this platform, we have a wholeness that is way more than the sum of the parts. There is something commonly integrating us together. Leaders who learn how to draw out what that common integration point is, in other words, the wholeness of this collective, will have the patience to ask the question, how are you entering today? What is grabbing your attention? What meaning are you assigning to it? Again, I'm just modeling that when we're working one to many, we have to go past our natural, well-earned skill at doing analysis in favor of awareness, evoking awareness of the collective, of itself, because we cannot see it through our individual eyes. It is only through the sharing that we begin to recognize, oh, wow, I had no idea Catherine thought that way about it. Oh, geez, I've never spent time talking with Candida, and I love the way that she languages what's going on. And Chrissy, I had an assumption in my head that you worked like this, but you just did something I never occurred to me was part of your capability. I'm sure many of you have had this experience. And unfortunately, our facilitation training, I'm sure many of you have had that, even early people leadership training for frontline leaders emphasizes connect with that person one-on-one, get to know them, find out what makes them tick, what's their value system, what are their principles, what are the skills they're bringing to the job, how come they came to this company? These are all good things. But at some point, just like we can't hold all the knowledge in the world, because it changes every 13 hours, we can't hold all the teams. Do you know that nurses today have as many as 250 direct reports, nurse officers?
Mhm.
It's just not possible, right? The one-to-one configuration doesn't fit 8 billion people on the planet in multinational companies on 6 continents, across time zones. It just doesn't. So the new paradigm that is really essential here is that we recognize that the client in the work we're doing collectively is the pattern of interaction. It's not the individuals in the room. It's what's motivating who they're being in the room together, and what do they sustain outside of the room as they're going about implementing the work that the team has come together to produce, the shared purpose that has brought them together. So my introductory remarks here are really just to give you some orientation. So take a moment quietly to think about what angle do you want to listen to the rest of our time together from? Are you listening at it as a one-on-one coach who wants to become a team coach? Are you listening as a team coach who's thinking, gosh, maybe there's more here for me? Are you a team leader with a team that's not performing well and you're wondering, gosh, what could I do for them? Are you a talent officer or L&D or HR who recognizes that you've got some challenges in the workplace climate right now, and you're looking for a way to help your teams find some stability? So give you a moment to Just identify the lens through which you're going to listen, because of course, that makes a really big difference. All right. Beyond we to us. This is what I have been talking about. And here is the rest of what we'll be focusing on. I'm going to look a little bit at how do you expand your skills for one-to-many and systemic impact. And share a little bit about our N3 framework. N3 stands for three verbs that start with N. Very simple. Notice, name, negotiate. How do we activate collective wholeness, and why would you want to in terms of performance outcomes for a team? And then ultimately, how do you get started? But I happen to think that it's really important to pay attention to the bias that any speaker is holding. You've got a little bit of mine already, but I want to give you another aspect to think about. This work from Microsoft, those of you who joined us in January, you've seen this data, but I want to think about it now when we are examining individual versus collective. Global skills projected to change by 50% by 2030 as compared to 2016. Having just spent 2.5 days with L&D people, I think that number is too low. um, Marriott, the hotel chain, obviously they work globally. They have 140,000 assets in their learning and development programs. And every single one of them is being retooled for upskilling and reskilling their workforce. So while it's true that artificial intelligence will support us in greater efficiency, to a person at this event, it was clear that the human qualities are the long-term source of success and innovation, affirming this data that I had read from Microsoft. Ingenuity, creativity, and connectedness. Individual ingenuity and individual creativity and individual connectedness with myself to remember my own wholeness is a starting point. But it is not how you move 300,000 people in an organization toward a North Star consistently. That happens in the interaction. That happens in the patterns of interaction, which makes the work that we're doing in the field of professional coaching so valuable, as we are focused on how are people showing up, what's motivating the way they're interacting, and ultimately making decisions. This makes this human skill arena so very important, whether you're an organizational leader, you're a team member on a team that's not firing on all cylinders yet, or you're a practitioner who's interested in supporting them. I think the business case is clear. So when we think about the first key shift, and I've given you some clues on this already, coaching the collective is fundamentally different because you are not concerned about who people are as they come in. They are. The individuals in a collective process want to know the company they keep for the purpose of how do they engage with each other in the most effective way possible. So perceiving patterns, the interactions in between the collective. So here's an example. In a one-on-one coaching interaction with an executive, I am absolutely paying attention to what are they accessing in themselves? What behavior are they demonstrating as they're describing the way they were with their team? What values am I noticing they're feeling great about? They're being highly honored in the way they're being, and the things that are causing a bit of tension, a little bit of disruption. They're feeling unsettled about how they're relating to the team. I'm listening for assumptions and preferences and habits and biases, things that show up in the form of beliefs. That's a lot. It's a lot of complexity. All right, do that times 10 when you're with a team. or a group, doesn't matter to me, a one-to-many context. It's not possible for you to be able to process all 10 people simultaneously. So fundamentally, what is different is you are going to be contracting with that group one-to-many to be sure that all are clear about what's expected to be delivered, to be sure that they are clear with each other about what brought them to this team. Were one or more of them voluntold and they have no idea what this group is expected to deliver? I'm thinking about an executive team for a multinational manufacturing company, and literally the CEO's ask was, "Can you please make my executive team a team? Because they don't think they are." And boy, was he right. To a person, they felt no synergy or integration with their colleague, except that they all reported to the CEO. So the first piece of work was helping, excuse me, was helping the CEO to have that dialogue with his team to say what his vision was for the value add of them operating as a horizontal strategy council for the organization. Highly profitable. They were delivering on what the analysts wanted on the street. But the CEO had a vision of taking them in some new directions, and he could not do it by his ideation alone. He wanted everybody's ideation, but they didn't see it as part of what they were expected to deliver. So my work with them as a team was helping them to gain awareness of themselves. What are my leader one, leader two, leader three, leader four, and so on? What are my habit, preference, assumptions, and biases about my executive role at this organization? At the end of the day, they made progress, but they lost two of their team members because they realized, I don't want to answer to anybody else. What he had was a team of 8 presidents. He did not have an executive team. So my work was about helping them to learn to see each other and to see what was motivating the way they were engaging with each other. I'm listening for the patterns that reveal that so that I can ask questions for them to be able to say it to each other. We get such a short period of time as team coaches to catalyze the break set that says the way you've been doing it is not moving you to what you say is your desired outcome. Our work together is to help you to identify what is it that you are holding as the identity or persona of this team and its purpose and its outcomes and its measures of success. Because without that, you won't move forward. You'll stay in the habit space. Oops, I didn't mean to lose it. Here we go. There we go. So here's the second thing that's fundamentally different. It's the client identity. Being able to engage with that collective, to perceive for those patterns is a very non-directive stance. In my example of one-on-one with the leader, I'm quite engaged with the context, the influences on him, his internal mindset, as well as contextually, what are the things that are moving in him that he cares enough to say, I'd like to resolve this in our session today. It's different when I'm working with a collective one-to-many. I'm much more interested in how well do they see what they are experiencing? How effective are they in sharing their description of their experience, staying available for each other to hear it, tying that to the relevance to producing business outcomes, and ultimately recognizing, you know what? We weren't listening to each other very well there. Let's back up a little bit. And learning how to navigate their own places of friction in the exchange of information and knowledge, understanding, inspiration, any of the things that are fundamentally part of what happens in a collective process. Now, a lot of what I just described is the third thing that is fundamentally different, which is the energetic engagement. if you think about your own life for a moment and you maybe look over the last week, see if you can recall the moments when you felt out of sorts. Um, Maybe not all the way to malaise or stress-induced fatigue, making it hard to focus. Not the extremes, but the more subtle things where it just feels like it's just not quite in sync for you. And maybe jot a couple of notes, see which things you're finding um, are the part, cause, or agency of that discomfort. Many leaders will take a lot of responsibility for it. It must be me. It must be something in what I'm doing. And most of the time, it's actually not. Most of the time, it's the influence of the system that I'm living in. So the human body is a system. My family is a system. The community I live in is a system. The organization, the team, my main team, my matrix teams, my peers are a team and a system. The organization as a whole, our customers are a system. And all of them have a common denominator in me, the individual, and how I make meaning or understanding of what's going on. So, how does my team leader know what's going on? How does the team coach know what's going on? How does the CHRO or the business partner, HR business partner, know what's going on? They know it by the energy. Engagement scores, pulse surveys. They go to an event, a town hall, and the next thing you know, you've got your link to say, give me an emoji score from 1 to 5. How fun was it for you? That's energetic. It's not rational. It's intuitive, instinctive, maybe jaded, or maybe Pollyannish. It doesn't really matter what we assign to it. It is an energetic engagement. Something happened in my experience, and you're asking me to give you a descriptor of it. If the work we're really doing is about helping them get to a finish line, performance, helping them to perform consistently while an environment is changing, right? Those are the big goals. The micro goals are, how do we support them to identify how to be with each other in a way that it has them feeling positive about the future, clear about the direction. Followers of leaders in the Gallup study, that's the definition of hope that I just gave you again, are putting it on somebody else's shoulders. I want the organization to give me a positive feeling. I want my leader to give me clear direction, and leaving themselves out of the formula. So one of the things that happens when you start to work collectively is that the members of the collective learn to recognize, I'm not without power and authority here. My voice matters. My point of view matters. Leaders who know how to open the space to let the energy flow among the members of the collective are going to get farther faster. Now, you might call that my bias, but I would say out of my now almost 28 years of doing this work, I know this to be true. The leaders who have teams who are able to scale very quickly have done that by ensuring that team members recognize they have part, cause, and agency of everything that happens in that team and in that system. And our job as team leaders or as coaches is to help them stay connected to the energy that gives them the patterns of interaction that let everybody's potential to get actualized. That's the high dream or the high goal. And the reason why I think it's so important that we talk about this. So I'm going to give you a little poll here. We're just going to do this manually, folks, not high tech. So as you look at the list, give it a rank from 1 to 5. So when you get to the bottom of the list, because they're all going to matter to you, You'll know which one is the winner. And then tell us which one you think is the most important challenge. Biggest process challenge, maybe, is the way I would frame it, when you're working with a team, either as a team leader, a fellow member of a team, or maybe you're already working with a team as a human development practitioner. All right. Managing personalities. Consistent accountability. Alignment to purpose. Interpersonal trust. Fluid creativity. And the last, psychological safety. All right. Go ahead and use the chat to identify what you think is the most important process challenge. All right. Safety, trust. Alignment to purpose, trust, alignment to purpose. All right. Okay. So purpose beat out. Oh yeah, look at that. Trust, safety, accountability. Trust is still pretty high here, folks. Just doing the visual. Okay. So in the Gallup study, trust was defined as honesty, respect, and integrity. What do you see? What do you let in as you're observing the pattern of interaction that tells you whether the team is having a state of trust or not, that the need for trust is getting met? Let's reflect on that for a moment when you're observing. Maybe you're a member of a team and you're in the team meeting, or you are a practitioner and you're working with a team. What are you paying attention to that suggests to you that trust is happening? Ah, friend, body language is too generic. What language do you observe for and make an assessment about as either high trust or low trust? Yes, Michelle. So the need to have safety to show up in the trust qualities. What reflects safety? You're observing. You've got your attention on what's going on in the pattern of interaction. What are you paying attention to that says, this is a high trust group or a low trust group, as the case may be? All right, Michelle, how are they engaging and are they authentic? What would you pay attention to that would tell you it was authentic? Okay, Thea. Sharing information freely. All right, there doesn't seem to be any hesitation. And maybe one you would add on top of that is you would notice that they're building on each other's ideas, not stretching the rubber band going, but I have this point of view and I have that point of view. Being present. So presence as in not distracted, or presence as in contribution. Think about the wide range that presence represents. And again, since we're in the evoking awareness business, whether I'm a team leader, a team member, or a practitioner, it does not matter. We must translate the language. What does presence mean? When we're working in collectives over time, one of the things that is always a best practice is to help them to identify what are the behaviors we will choose to abide with each other that will strengthen our collective experience of learning, of producing results, of creativity, whatever the outcome is that's the shared purpose of the team. Yes, level and desire of contribution. Being open while respecting each other. How would I know that people were respecting each other? What is the behavior that I would observe? What is the emotion I would sense in the field? What would my gut tell me when a team is firing all cylinders and when they're at each other's odds? That was a little mixed metaphor. Hopefully you got that. Clarify and confirm. Clarify what, confirm what. So if I were going to tighten that up a little bit, Jeff, I might say members inquire of each other to clarify meaning, not just definitions, and confirm relevance to what they're working on. So that's me paying attention to a pattern, going, I see them. They ask questions of each other that bring clarity. And they don't move forward until the collective says, we're on the same page. So notice trust beat out purpose because purpose is intellect. And trust is working at the level of the heart and the guts, the intuition and the insight of instinct. Yeah, Mark, I think discernment is the 21st century skill. Particularly when you think about what technology does for us, right? The rapid pace at which we're able to get answers, possible answers to problems we're trying to solve, we begin to see, you know what? It's not about solutions. It's about how we engage with each other to implement those solutions and ensure that it is manifesting the success we imagined was possible. And then if it wasn't, it's not personal. It was a set of choices. What led us to make those choices? What beliefs did we have that had us use that basis to make those choices? Now, what I just did verbally is a reflection process. This is another very important piece of a team learning about itself. So it is not up to us as team leaders, because we're not with them every day, every hour. Some team leaders have way too many people to do that with. And the same would be true for us if we're a practitioner. So the question is, what do we get curious about? What is the way in which the team can reveal to us what is got their attention? What are they causing to have happen? And in what way do they make the connection to desired outcomes? And these are really simple questions. I guarantee you most team leaders don't ask them. They ask for a status on the project, right? We always do that. We ask for status when we don't really need to use our precious live one-on-one interaction time to do that. That could be in a report in a database somewhere. We know from the report if we're on green plan or red plan or yellow plan. Somebody said this beautiful thing who's working on a huge data repository that right now is very bifurcated across the organization, and they're trying to get a central repository where everybody can use the same data so that they stop talking about the data. And instead, they're talking about the meaning of the data. Same thing here. A good leader asks about their experience. What are you experiencing in the last 30 days different from the previous month, having chosen to do X? And in that one question, the leader is going to learn far more than they would in 10 one-on-one conversations, as will the team, because they haven't been together either, right? So you begin to get the full kaleidoscope by asking the open-ended generative question. Yes, attuned curiosity. Lovely, Doomy. Exactly. And ultimately, moving past the idea that it's the definition of the words and more, have we told the story? All humans learn by story. This will always be true. It is in our nature as mammals, animals, connection, the sense of belonging that occurs when we share our stories with each other. Our opportunity working collectively and generatively is to help them tell a meaningful story. Meaningful is defined by what? Measures of success. Meaningful is defined by impact that we want to create for the people who are going to get the benefit of whatever it is we're working on. By the influence on how people think, feel, sense, make meaning, love, connect, feel a sense of belonging. And this is a very different way of operating than we do in one-on-one. And maybe it'll feel relieving to the leaders and the practitioners on the call. It's not your job to find the answer. It's yours to believe that the answer already exists somewhere at some time. It lives already inside the system that this team is operating. And we get the great privilege to keep being in wonder about the one or more people in this collective that's come together that are going to go, oh, what about this? Because you've created the environment for them to do that. So while the processes of trust might seem like the most challenging, it's actually going to be the place where they move past their disbelief that not everybody in the room is on the same commitment to our wholeness, to begin to model the very wonder that you've inserted to the field. As I said, leader or practitioner, it doesn't matter. Yes, thank you, Lori. Exactly. All right. So I said I would talk a little bit about notice, name, negotiate. So let me go back and pick this up here for you. How many of you, just put a 1 in the chat for me if you've done something called ground rules or rules of engagement? And how effective on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being awesome and 1 being not so much, have you found rules of engagement and ground rules to be? It depends on the team. And Cheryl, in what way? What is the quality in the team that you have found made it successful or not successful?
Trust. Absolutely trust. So people will nod and say, sure, we'll follow those rules of engagement. And then walk around the corner and do something different.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is really where notice and name came from. Actually, really all three ultimately. And teaming agreements is something, yes, commitment and how well they keep it going. Good, Michelle. I'm not a fan of the language rules of engagement or ground rules because for most people it evokes a feeling of being in the 3rd grade. You had to raise your hand to go to the bathroom, right? You had to get in a line before you left the classroom to go out to recess, things like that. But I think that adults learning to work with each other have a desire to have a voice in what they're agreeing to. And ultimately, the reason they're there is to get something done. And so everybody has a vested interest in identifying what behaviors will have us optimize our work together. Now, notice I'm using really different language here. And I'm going to give you the real secret sauce to teaming agreements. Many of you might know Google studied this for almost 2 years, something called Project Aristotle. Some of you might have read Charles Duhigg's New York Times article that was based on the study that Google did. I think it was something like 1,800 teams and tons of, multi-factor data analysis to come to the conclusion that the way people work together on a team is the only determining factor about whether they succeed or fail. Now, that sounds like way too simple, and because it's a pretty profound simplicity. So what it means is the work that we do in constructing the formation of a team or entering a team that's not doing well to help them find a new ground and center as a result of something having disrupted them, or a high-performing team that's exhausted and really needs to attend to its own well-being before it can fire on all cylinders again. It doesn't really matter. All of the above is the pause moment in which we tell the truth to each other about what we want. What is the way we will be together that we know allows each of us to bring as much of our wholeness as we can get access to, and know that the collective will be way more than the sum of the parts when we remember our humanity. To me, this is what teaming agreements provide. Now, to Cheryl's wonderful point about, and then they go out the door and do something completely different. You as the practitioner or the team leader cannot police this. If it is not something that the individuals of the team are invested in, you're just going to continue to have toxicity. Why do I call it that? Because that's the source of the mistrust. There's no integrity in the agreements that have been made. Right? That's why we talk about trust, or this is Lencioni's work on the 5 dysfunctions of a team, all of which is very diagnostic. We can look in the rearview mirror and see it happening. What we want to do is look in the room and out the front windshield to say, what we've been doing isn't producing the experience we want or the outcomes we want. What is the way we will choose to be with each other differently? And this is our domain as a team leader or as a practitioner, to help a team recognize, you know what, I've got some bad habits I'm doing again. We made an agreement that we would not talk about somebody who wasn't present in the room. And here we are, we're doing it. Now, here's the 3 questions I ask. Teams are getting a lot better, lot better at being able to identify behaviors that they want with each other. There's a technique when we're working with them, team leader or practitioner, doesn't matter. In what way does this behavior strengthen your confidence to deliver what's expected of this team? In what way does this behavior strengthen your confidence to deliver what's expected of this team? Business relevance is key. This cannot be a kumbaya, let's hug together, let's all feel great together. That will fail miserably because we don't trust each other yet. We don't have a reason to. We haven't spent time with each other really understanding what it takes to be together effectively. So that's a question that must be asked to make the connection clear. The way we work together is what produces results in organizations. Again, really simple language, but we step right over it in the interest of what's the transaction, what's the process, what's the data. All right. We have a list together. The next thing is to invite commitment to it. And there's 3 questions that get asked. I do this with every single team I work with. Will you abide these behaviors in your contribution to this team? Will you abide these behaviors outside of team meetings as you're doing the work of this team? And will you notice these behaviors? Acknowledge them out loud with each other when they're really working, so you celebrate and affirm them. And most importantly, acknowledge when they're not being done so that you pause and come back to your commitments again. And if they cannot say yes to all 3 questions, we're not done building the teaming agreements. Now, what does that do for you as a team leader or a practitioner, either one? It gives you an opportunity when you are perceiving the patterns of interaction and you're recognizing the energy is off in the room today. What the heck is going on here? Your teaming agreements are the place you go. In what way is your collective energy today honoring the grit that you know that this temporary situation is asking for? Just an example, right? A lot of that going on right now. Anybody working in healthcare? Oh my gosh. Tough, tough, tough. Fundamental industry transformation, lots and lots of burnout. I don't know about you, but trying to get a doctor's appointment takes 2.5 months before you can get in. It's an indication of just how stretched people are. So what we're doing when we're working in a more collective space is bringing people back to remember, what is my humanity that I'd agreed to bring? And am I bringing it? And if I'm not bringing it, is anybody calling me on it? It's not the coach's job to do that. It's not HR's job to do that. It's really not even the team leader's job to do that. But we certainly can observe when people are not behaving in the way that they've made an agreement with each other to be. So, one thing to take away. Comments, questions? I'll just open the floor there a minute before I was going to put you into some pairs to talk about unproductive habits. But before we go there, we've covered a lot of territory. Let's just check in. So why don't you use, raise your hand if you wouldn't mind. You can all open your mics. It's easy schmeezy. Thea, you opened your mic. Do you want to say something? Tiffany beat you to it. Go ahead, Tiffany.
So, how much grace do you give for a toxic team member? You don't want to, put it to them like, if you don't straighten up, you get shipped out. I mean, because no one wants that, right? People need room to grow. They need room to be able to fall into place, of what you're asking and requesting. But like, how much is enough time to give to, um, yeah, to give to them?
All right. My answer is going to probably startle you a little bit because it's not about the toxic team member. It is about what in the environment allowed a toxic team member to become toxic. Nobody gets up in the morning wanting to make somebody else's life miserable. That happens over time. That you have people who are skeptical, burn out, challenged, frustrated, and they, over time, they can't hold it inside anymore, so it gets expressed out. But a wise leader recognizes those situations earlier, before they become complete warfare on a team. So the first thing to notice is compassion. Wow, what's happening here in this environment that this person is feeling this way and expressing it so directly with us? What did I miss that I didn't see this sooner? Because I guarantee you, everybody noticed the tension. Or as Cheryl was talking about at the water cooler, we had a conversation like, wow, did you see that in the meeting last week? Right? The early indicators are always there, but we bypass them. So a toxic person in a team is an indicator of an unhealthy system. That's not just that person. They just happen to be the one who's the voice of it at the moment. And ultimately, the discovery of 6 weeks ago, that person was told their job was going to be eliminated, but they couldn't tell anybody yet. Now the layoffs have been announced and everybody knows this person is leaving and they figure, I can actually have my say now. And boy, do they. I'm just giving an example. There's always something that happens that creates the way people are showing up that we label as toxic, that's a bad person, rather than recognizing that's a bad circumstance. When I fully believe that every person I work with is whole, resourceful, capable, and creative, I'm going to be looking for the strengths. I'm going to be looking for what works about this person. I'm going to be looking for the evidence that supports the reason they're in the organization in the first place. And then I'm going to ask the question, in what way does your emotional outburst here help you contribute more effectively to this team? What is it? What is it you're asking for? What do you want here? So the responsibility is with them, because right now they've got it projected out on the system, on the boss, on my teammates, on that stakeholder over there, on that customer, whatever it might be. And our job is to help them come back home to themselves and realize you have the resource to fix this. Will you choose it? And ultimately, Tiffany, some people don't, and they leave. Or there's, unfortunately, in way too many organizations, they get moved off to another team. and there's somebody else's manager to manage. What we're really suggesting here is that's not what we want. We want to embrace the tension and get to the bottom of it. And we do that with generative curiosity. All right, Thea, did you want to ask a question or make a comment? I don't see anybody else with their mic open. Am I scary? Come on. Yes, Doomy, that's right. What's it saying about the system or the team? I just think for all of us to have some grace with ourselves. This is a really, really difficult time. I don't care what country you're in. Maybe the penguins are doing okay, although I don't know. Their icebergs are getting smaller. But in all seriousness, it doesn't really matter if we're looking at economics or education or government or community services or, simply running a going concern on an ongoing basis. It's hard right now. There's just so much complexity and uncertainty. And the only thing we really ever have choice about is listening to our own inner authority. When we accept responsibility that we were always part, cause, or agent of our life experience, things get a lot simpler. There's always one thing I can do, which might be take 5 minutes and go outside and walk around the block. Now, it needs to be more complex than that as we're working with executives, of course, and their teams. They have big responsibilities. But if we lose sight of the practices for a team to stay sustaining in their humanity, they won't be productive in getting the work done anyway. Alan, you look like you're thinking about.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm in the government space as an internal, not only as an internal in my particular office of scientists, engineers, clinicians. I'm in the regulatory world,
Okay.
and also in the larger space of this frenetic. We don't know what's going to happen. When is the next shoe going to drop? And I mean, just I don't want to be my boss having to deal with this. I mean, we're part of the leadership team, but she's ultimately responsible for ensuring. And I really appreciated what you had to say about, the curiosity and just being this whole notion of grace right now, because I'm seeing some really weird behavior right now, and rightly so. I'm not saying, sometimes we gotta, but I have to remind folks, we still have control over how we respond. And even the boss had to say, "Hey, Alan, get over yourself. I need you." Cooler heads must prevail in this situation. And those are all great because you got the left brain working. You got the skills. You got everything that you need in order. And okay, so what? They ask you to do something that really want to do. Well, welcome to life. You get over it. You move on. And that's happened before in the last 38 years. So it's not that big a deal. Or if they ask you to your services are no longer needed here. Okay, so what? Okay, I mean that happens to millions of people before me, and it will happen to millions after me for various reasons. Okay.
You've done a beautiful job of framing context.
Yeah, it really. Yeah, it's. I don't think I mean, my gut says it's a bunch of hooey, right? But my brain says if you really want to, so it's really connecting the gut with the brain and trying to get the brain to, because I was trying to use with my leaders last 2 weeks. I was doing some transition management stuff out of Bridges material, and then I was accused of being tone deaf. And here I am saying, as a leader, you can communicate these things. And I was accused of being tone deaf and not understanding it. So, hey guys, I'm going through the same stuff.
Mm.
It's really helping people see, and I really appreciate encouraging people to look at things from, you know, they have a lot more control over what's happening than they realize.
Yes.
And I really appreciate that.
And I can hear, Alan, your sensitivity to framing the conversation that way, even when people can't quite hear it yet.
Yeah.
Leaders who can stay steady to say, I understand, and I'm also experiencing the disruption that you all are, each of us in our own way, in our own context, and we're not powerless.
Right.
The government leaders that I have spoken with, and we've spent a bit of time talking about name 3 things that are going to be the same this afternoon, tomorrow morning, the next day, the one after that, regardless of what's going on at a policy level. What is in your ability to influence, control, and affect? And to help each other, right? When people go crazy, like, I can't believe that just happened. Yeah, you're right. And that's not all that's going on, right?
Mhm.
We have a responsibility to each other in a collective, to help us remember our humanity. Yes, it sucks. And you have capacity. You have
Mhm.
resourcefulness. Um, one thing I have been doing with teams, I will confess, I used to do this a lot in one-on-one. I don't know why I stopped doing it. But if they've come in to a session and they're kind of at their wits' ends, I'll say, okay, uh, you have 10 minutes. I want to hear it big and bad. Go as hard as you possibly can. I want to hear every single thing you're kvetching about. I said, but you got to pass the baton. So you got to hear absolutely everybody's version of what's messed up. And when you're done after 10 minutes, then we're going to stand up, take a few breaths, shake it off. And then you tell me, what are you going to address or resolve today in our work together? In other words, there's nothing wrong with the upset. It's if we identify that as the only thing instead of realizing that's the upset, and
Yeah.
there's so much more to who this person is, who this team is, who this collective is. That's our possibility as leaders and as practitioners, is to help them to get a little perspective and restore their access to that capability.
Well, one way I try to remind people, I said, we still have a responsibility to the American people to protect the public health. And that's why they're there to begin with. So I kind of reconnect with their purpose, the why, the why question, and I'm in it for the same thing, It's like I'm supporting them in their work. I'm not an engineer or, a medical device reviewer, but I certainly, hey, I'm there to make sure that they're okay doing that work, right?
Yep,
I got to remind myself of that occasionally.
absolutely. We all do. And to have it be all right that we are having a moment. There isn't anything wrong with that. Um, One thing that tension is normal. It's how we relate to the tension. If we relate to the tension as it's something wrong, as opposed to it's a moment for me to pay attention differently, like, oh God, my shoulders are tight. Huh. I wonder what created that. How long have I been sitting with my shoulders tight? What was that meeting where it first happened? Let me put my attention there and ask myself or another a question that's relevant to my tight shoulders, not 3 hours later when I'm in a meeting and somebody says something that I disproportionately react to. Um, One-on-one work to reflect and work on that, very common. But doing that in a collective, we have a little different pacing in that. And our questions as leaders or practitioners are designed to give them an opportunity to pull back for perspective and use a talking stick or some way to pass the baton if you're working virtually, so that they can hear each other and realize they're not alone, right? This is the other thing I'm hearing, Alan, in what you're describing. When we realize we're not the only one who's feeling this way, right? There's an exhale that says, okay, what are we feeling that now is on the possibility side of this? What's one thing we could do a little differently in the next week that can help us all have a little more harmony? And what did we do? We activated what we call sovereignty. Yes, multisyllabic word, but it's simply Sav is self and Rain is rule, self-ruling. When I can come back home to self and realize I know what's right for me. I know what I want to get done. I accept responsibility for making a different choice and how I'm going to relate to this situation. How do I choose? I choose based on my values and my principles, the essence of who I am. And in a team, I want my team members to know that. I want them to know what's going on for me. So as leaders, we want to create opportunities for that conversation to happen, because the truth is nothing else is going to get done if we can't clear the field of the upset. It is the thing that creates flow so that they can work productively. And unfortunately, that kind of human interaction component has been undervalued in organizations, and we've over-revered a bit of our transactional acumen in sort of a, I don't know, this may sound silly to you, but it seems like it's a cosmic joke, because AI will eliminate a lot of the energy that's put to more throughput, more productivity, and there will be space created. How will we choose to use the space that gets created? No, it's not all about reduction in workforce. It really could get redeployed to the thing humans do really well, which is innovation. What's the number one block to innovation in teams? Or as I say to leaders all the time, what's the four-letter word that's your excuse for not doing what you committed to yourself last week? You all know what word it is, right? Anybody want to blurt? Starts with a T. Oh, they're so overthinking. Time,
Time, yeah, yeah.
right? We all say we don't have time. Well, come on. Time is a construct. We made it up as humans. Are we really going to set down that we have the power of choice about what we give our time and attention to? Yeah, we're not going to do that. But sometimes we need a little reminding. All right, I am making up breakout rooms. I had this for pairs, but I think you guys are in the thick of it. So I'm going to leave you in triads. And I want to show you what I'm inviting you to have a look-see at. If I can make my do 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 do. Ah, here we go. Everybody seeing that now? All right, so ignore my pairs. You'll be in either a triad or a quad. And I'll give you 15 minutes, because we always complain that we never get enough time to talk to each other. So I get that. What's one common unproductive team habit? So this is a team you're on, this is a team you lead, this is a team you're coaching, whatever it might be. What's one common unproductive team habit that you've observed? Look at it from each of the three perspectives. And when you come back, put in chat your consensus answer. What did you come to as you think the most important common unproductive team habit that you think it would be useful to break through? All right. The rooms are open. And I will bring you back 14 minutes or so. Everybody have fun? Yes, Carol's nodding her head. Fran's nodding. Good job. All right, take a moment and put your consensus into the chat. Only one roommate came back? You guys must have been really efficient. Mhm. Okay, the others are clearly using the every last 60 seconds. Yes, Jeff, that's always the case. Never enough time.
Did we not all get the same 60 seconds?
Yeah, you all did. We just had one group that was very efficient.
Ah, gotcha.
Um, that's the project manager in me.
Yes, I understand. Oh, and Thea, you only had two. That's right. That's fun. All right. So, what was the unproductive habit? Fear, not listening at the root of the fear, and control. Being controlled or not feeling like you have control?
Both.
Both.
So we sort of created an ecosystem in a way.
Yes, exactly. So being controlled, oh, having biases rooted in a closed mindset. Good. The blame game, the gossip mill, and the rigid agendas. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, are we supposed to do this in chat?
Yes, please.
Okay, missed that piece.
No worries. Reticence to change. Yes, Liz Ann. And what is that? Is it our identity that people know us a certain way, and if I show up a different way, they aren't going to like me? Is it that my boss expects me to do X, but now that I'm in the team, I'm realizing that Y is a better answer, but I don't want to disappoint my boss? I'm just giving a couple of options. Right, Nicole. And so in this case, if trust means honesty, respect, and integrity, in what way are we out of integrity with ourselves if we're not courageous to say something that might be disruptive or different, simply just different? And what is that signaling? That the organizational climate values more than my unique contribution. I said to a leader the other day, he was complaining about two people on his team, and I said, when did you hire them? Oh, well, let me see. One of them's been here for 12 years and the other's been here for 8 years. And I said, and they're just now a problem? And he said, that's not fair. I said, it's totally fair. You've just spent 25 minutes talking with me about these two people who you hired, have encouraged, promoted, extended opportunities to, and now all of a sudden you think they don't fit? When did you stop noticing what it was they might be wanting in order to optimize their contribution? Which, of course, you realize completely changed our conversation. Because what was the leader doing? Absolving himself of any responsibility for the experience of these two leaders, who he did, in fact, personally hire. Lower perception of self and own impact, yes, combined with strong perceptions of others, assumed to be true without any curiosity or challenge. Thank you, Catherine. Beautifully written. That is exactly right. And see all the places that we could unpack that as a team leader and as a practitioner to help them to connect to it. So how do we break these unproductive habits? Because they are. Neurobiologically, our bodies prefer habits. It's all the way back to the oldest part of the brainstem. We do it in order to stay safe. We figure out how to manage our territory, something called the reticular activating system. So if I have an unproductive habit, it's being held in place because it keeps me safe. Until somebody points out to me, it's the old poem about until we notice that we fail to notice, there is little we can do to change. We have to notice that we're failing to notice. And now it's influencing our thoughts and deeds. So the two ways we break it, first is helping people understand, have awareness for, viscerally have the awareness for how this does not amplify their strengths individually or collectively. We're not going to get to new choices that improve performance without getting awareness of the impact of the existing use of strengths, or lack thereof, as it might be. Right, Jeff. And we keep looking for the catalyst for change outside of ourselves. So, what is that about? And that's really on the consistency side, as I've put here on the slide. That when a team can realize that it has preferences, it's amazing to me when I ask people that question, what's your preference in this process? There'll be long silences. It's not unusual with a team to have 3 or 4 minutes with nobody saying anything. So team leaders and practitioners, get really comfortable with silence, because it's not the kinds of questions we're asking to have them reflect on what's motivating the experience that I'm having that I don't like. Most people don't spend much time there. They won't have a top of mind answer. That's the good news, actually. We might actually have an insight that surfaces that they find easy to actualize. And it's going to live in that land of preferences and biases that are creating the friction. The caution I would give you, and it has to do with the control or be controlled, right? Has to do with helping them, right? How would I address that? Helping them to understand that they have made choices, and their choices are creating an outcome. Take the label off of it as a good or a bad outcome in favor of the first point. In what way is the approach we use to produce the outcome causing us to not like the outcome? I know, very simple language. But if we are in our dissatisfaction, we're not thinking rationally. And we will project it out on somebody else. So, Kendino, what we're trying to do is to have each person begin to recognize, oh, I thought we were doing X. And now I understand, listening to John, that we were doing Y. I totally missed that. And in the instance of sharing that, they've broken the it's all your fault. And they're realizing that as a collective, they're making choices together. Our job, team leader or practitioner, is to ask the questions that help them to describe the experience in practical, observable application that is relevant to their shared purpose. You know, Jeff, you're right. It is useful to find out what people are available for change. But before we go there has to be something that is connecting them to the discussion in the first place. So, as with any good root cause analysis, right? We use the 5 why questions to analyze the situation and get to the root cause of the problem. We don't use why with humans because it puts us in the rearview mirror and we justify and explain what we did in the past. So we are using what questions to help them to articulate for themselves, what was I experiencing? What were you sensing? What did you intuit here? What was the influence on you? What was the impact? What meaning did you make of it? What considerations were you giving it? In other words, those questions are all inviting them to tell the story from their internal point of view. Yes. So when they have the experience clear in the present moment, and it now becomes a shared narrative as they've listened to each other describe it, that can realize, you know what? That was completely unconscious. We have a habit in this organization of doing blah, blah, blah. Uh-huh. What would be the change in that habit that would have created a different result? Not necessarily better, but different is the first thing. And then tying it to what different results would get us down the road to the thing we're here to accomplish in the first place, the shared purpose. None of this requires, I really want you guys to hear this, practitioner or leader, it doesn't matter. None of it requires that you know the details. That's what you got the team for. You've constructed the team because they have the subject matter expertise, perspective, influence, relationships in the organization to get the job done. Our work is to remove what they've put in their way in the form of habit, preference, assumption, and bias. How do we do that? We don't remove it for them. We help them recognize that it's operating because it operates unconsciously. Once it's up to the surface, then they can step towards something new. All right. Did I miss any others here that looked really interesting? Carol, since you brought in the control piece, how do you think about it now, right? Being controlled or feeling out of control of the situation?
One of the discussions that we had in our group was that when people don't recognize that they have a choice.
Mhm.
And so, you know, the control isn't always something that's being done to them or done for them.
Right.
So the recognition of choice and then deciding what are you going to do with that choice that you have when it comes with control.
Great. Great. And that gets both sides of the paradigm. So I mentioned end of the three a little bit earlier. This is a good bridge to that. So notice, name, negotiate. And we undervalue noticing. It's just stunning to me. That was my talk at CLO, by the way, listening beyond the words, which is noticing that I'm having an experience that is not common. Something's been disruptive. It's creating an emotional response anywhere along the spectrum. I don't care what the emotion is, but it's noticing that something has disrupted my autopilot. That's the first place to help a team recognize. Now, what are we doing as a team leader observing that, or as a practitioner? We're noticing the energy. What is the energetic engagement, right? Back to what we talked about a little bit earlier. And allowing that to stimulate our curiosity and our wonder, asking a question we couldn't possibly know the answer to. It only lives in the perception of the team. So a question goes to all of them. What shifted in the last 5 minutes energetically that has slowed down the conversation as I'm observing you? Is the invitation we give them. So we're see, hear, feel, sense, intuit, reactions, impulse. You're not naming it for them. Yes, that's great, Thea. You're not naming it for them. You're observing and inviting them to notice it for themselves across all of the ways of knowing, multidimensionally, and ultimately asking them a question to see if they can surface for themselves what motivated it. Habit, preference, assumption, bias, policy, principle, the history, right? All systems are a function of time and place and exchange. On whose shoulders are we standing? Who got fired 2 years ago and never got acknowledged for their contribution, and somebody's still the voice of the guy who got fired? I'm sure all of you have had that experience of being on a team. Well, we used to never do it that way. It's not uncommon. But you want the team to be able to name that and to say, ultimately, in order to come back to my sense of agency, that I have choice, I do have choice. It might not be as big a choice as I would like it to be, but this piece, I could go and have a conversation with my boss about. Very common in matrix teams, right? They're on loan from lots of different parts of the organization working on some corporate project, and they're the voice of their stakeholder. And oftentimes negotiation is the only way to make progress because the different functions of the business are at odds with each other. And again, we're not doing the negotiating, but we're asking the questions to help them frame what are the elements we choose to negotiate? How is that tied in a relevant way to the business outcome that this team has come together to produce? Never forget that piece. At the end of the day, the organization is still our customer. And this goes to the last kind of key shift that I wanted to leave you all with today, which really is that there's 2 points of view. The coaches, which could be a team leader, their point of view. I'm sharing a quote from Ruth Wageman, who has 40 years studied design thinking in human systems, Harvard professor. Teams are complex systems. We cannot make them great. So if you think that's your job, stop it. It's not possible. We can assist them to think about things that nourish the soil. Teaming agreements for learning, teaming agreements for working, teaming agreements for creating, prevent disease, noticing when we are not on our best game, when our old habitual behaviors that are competitive instead of collaborative are starting to weave into our conversations, noticing it as quickly as we can and resetting and removing obstacles. When we feel, to Alan's point earlier, there's things that are out of our control. It's just the case. What is in our control? Focus. Put ourselves in the place of best potential to move towards that. So these are 3 kind of ordinary language ways I think that we can understand how do we stimulate the collective intelligence. And in the systems view, the notion about wholeness, where we started today, that somewhere, somehow, everything needed to be known exists within the collective. And inviting them to slow down, to pause the angst, and remember they have resourceful, capable, creative aspects in themselves to bring to bear on this new situation. Oftentimes, the greatest thing we can do is simply give them a few minutes to be quiet and remember, which is what we do. This is at the heart of the generative team coaching work we do at inviteCHANGE, both in our services and in the education program, is to teach what it means to be a sovereign team. How does the team self-rule, no matter what's going on in the environment? And you'll see the definition of accountability for me. I don't believe in holding people accountable. I think it's a silly notion because I can never hold that over another person. There can be consequences if I don't fulfill my responsibility. Absolutely. Which gets us to the heart. Every person is accountable. They can take account of their actions and choices and their mindset. In a system, there are requesters. They request something of somebody and they say, you have the authority to fulfill this. I want you to fulfill the promise for me. And the promiser says, oh, sure, boss, I'll do that. And then goes away and says, how am I going to do that? And the key here is to help a team know what to negotiate for. What are the conditions of satisfaction? And sometimes that means going back to the original requester and saying, that was a pipe dream. We've done the analysis. It's no way that's in 60 days. This is going to be 120 days. Here are the questions we have to make sure that we've calibrated this right. What have we just done? We've empowered that team to accept responsibility for fulfilling the objective. And oh, by the way, the requester is going to be far happier than waiting 6 weeks, hearing nothing, and then being told, oops, surprise, we can't do it. So team sovereignty is a big part of our program. Those of you that aren't familiar with it, it is a generative journey in and of itself. So everything we do is experiential. And there is a live simulation where you're working, applying the skills immediately with each other on a project that you're doing inside the program. 10 weeks in foundations around all of this, working with culture and systems. And then at the end, I just don't think 5 hours of team coaching supervision is enough. So we do 10, where as you're beginning to do application with your own customers, then you have an opportunity to come back and get support to the nuances that you're seeing and working in a more systemic way. And our next program is in April for those that might be interested. We do this work inside of organizations with internal teams, with leaders, as well as open enrollment for folks who are on the coaching journey themselves. And here's all the ways to get a hold of me. Hamad will be sending out the recording and the deck, so you'll have the information there. Lori is also available as our coaching education manager, and I think she's already put her contact information in chat for you. And we are at our witching hour. Amazing how that happens, huh? We have a few minutes if there's some comments or questions that you would like to say. Well, what as you're exiting, and feel free to add a comment or a question and say, as you're exiting, what's the most important thing you took away today out of our time together? Thank you, Jeff. It does require opening your mic to speak.
My takeaway is, because I don't have a problem speaking.
Awesome, Fran. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And when you started out, and Lizanne just put it in there, hope is where it's at, and hope is important, and it was a nice reminder of the importance of hope.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
For me, it was the reiteration of the fact that for leaders, expressing to people that they too are experiencing disruption, and that attaches itself to them being vulnerable. And, as an executive told me the other day in a coaching session, I'm a human too, because people expect executives or executives themselves start to feel as if, they're a robot. They should be high performing all the time and not have feelings about this expectation to be high performing. So even putting that into the open with the team helps the team to relax and realize that, oh yeah, I'm not in this alone. I'm not the only one who's having doubts about myself. So bringing that into the collective field is something for exploration.
To the multi-generational question that Kimball asked very early on, there are an awful lot of folks who are in the 50 and up who grew up in a workplace climate that said, never let them see you sweat.
Yeah.
So for them, it doesn't compute that being able to say to your team, hey, I'm in this disruption too. So that means raising awareness. What happens when you go home and you say to your wife, I don't know what I'm going to do about this team or these people or this situation. Yeah, my wife gives me grace and compassion and helps put things in perspective. So what would keep you from doing that at work?
Mm.
Right? So there's always a doorway in if we're in the mindset of wholeness. And obviously the flip of that paradigm, the sense of purpose and the really clear demand that organizations walk their talk. These are things that are asking for that vulnerability because it's not trustworthy otherwise. So for leaders to understand that if you choose not to do this, you're actually going to get in the way of optimizing what this next generation of the workforce is here to bring you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not an either or.
Yeah.
Anna?
Yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
Well, first of all, I have to say that my desire to have at least one takeaway today of great value was far exceeded. So thank you for that.
Good.
But relevant to your question, the one that's really sitting with me now as we end up is your reminder when dealing with individuals who are perceived as difficult or toxic, that question about what in the environment allowed this individual to become this way, miserable, difficult, or whatever. And that, I think, is something that often gets a little bit lost in the moment. So that was a big aha for me tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome. And for the person who's sitting in that question to realize if you've been sitting in the discomfort, so have they.
Yeah.
So that's a place where you can meet.
Yeah.
And allow for the dialogue now to open up to say, how do we together change this?
But it totally shifts the conversation with the team leader, head of whatever, who just wants this problem person dealt with. How did we get from there to here? You didn't hire a problem. You're dealing with one now.
Exactly.
How did
Exactly.
that happen?
I was having a very wonderful conversation with one of the CHROs that was at the CLO exchange, and we were talking about people who are in meltdown at the office, and the HRBPs are pulling their hair out. It's like, I just want to help relieve their pain. And she said, what do I say to them? Well, first of all, help them relieve their own pain because they're trying to fulfill that by taking care of their folks. And second, help them to create space. They're not responsible for helping them. They're responsible for restoring them and their access back to their own wholeness. It's a different conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks. Anybody else? I see some things here in chat. Thea, I've been working quite a bit with this idea of curiosity is not enough. I think a lot of our curiosity, the old adage of curiosity killed the cat. Asking questions that are out of context are not useful. Questions that are picking up on how someone has expressed the experience they're having of the context, far more useful, so that they can start to calibrate what are they making meaningful. And is it actually happening? Or is it history that they're remembering? Or a future projection that they're afraid of but hasn't happened yet? Oh my gosh, this is definitely happening for our federal workers. And understandably so, right? I don't have any judgment about that. But the question is, how do we support them to stay in the present moment and to see with clear eyes what's actually occurring and what's the evidence they're using to support? And if they don't have any, okay, who would you ask? What's the question you would ask to identify what's stimulating the way you're experiencing this, which now puts them into choice and agency. And ultimately, I like the word wonder. You can't start with wonder, but I think as coaches or as leaders, when we can ask ourselves the question, I wonder what's stimulating this person to be experiencing this as they're describing it to me. My experience is not the same. I wonder what I'm going through on a daily basis and how different it is from this person. It must be because we have such different interpretations, which then brings compassion for that leader to be able to sit down and get curious. So our work as practitioners is to help them pull back for perspective and begin to ask the questions that help us to say, from where within us is this way I'm experiencing it arising? And in that moment, we're back in our wholeness and we're back in agency, and then we can grant it to somebody else. That's great. Wonderful. All right, my friends. Well, have a couple of minutes extra to go and refresh yourselves. Thanks for your wonderful participation and attention today. Tomorrow, we're going to be out of collective work and into artful mastery as leaders and as coaches. And I hope you'll come back and join us. And as you know, we're doing this monthly. It'll be free masterclass all year. Ahmad's put together a wonderful calendar. Leadership will be our theme in March, and pass the word along. I would love to see more and more of us together. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.